You are about to hear CD3, Bob D, Adrian C, doing a 12-step Big Book workshop on, what was the date? 1/28/2017 at the Conscious Contact Speaker Group, Doylestown, Pennsylvania, 301 North Main Street. We meet every Saturday at 8:30 p.m., 1-hour speaker meeting. Let me get this going and enjoy the CD.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello everybody, my name is Adrian Clark. I'm an alcoholic. How are we doing? So, up until this point, we've talked about some stuff, and I kind of get the gist that I may have this thing, this alcoholism, the wet side and the dry side. And, I found myself days sober, roaming around Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't have a sponsor. I want to get one. I got my eye open for one. I heard a lady say something that it helped me so much. She said, if you don't have a sponsor and you don't know how to get one, if you're lucky enough to have a bed, when you go home tonight, sit on the end of it and ask for a sponsor. And I done that, how stupid it sounded. I think that was probably some of my first experience, not only with prayer and AA, but also with this thing that's developed in my life today, this synchronicity with this power that I've sought after in Alcoholics Anonymous. And lo and behold, when I start to pray and when I start to kind of consider that there may be an idea of a power or a God or something in this universe, whatever makes sense to you, it starts to show up in my life. And a gentleman showed up back in Belfast, and he seemed enthusiastic about AA. He really did, and he kind of 12-stepped me in a way. I think I kind of came to AA already taking the first 3 steps. There was a lot of things I was on. What I'm saying is I was ready to move forward. I just didn't know how to do it. I still had to be armed with the facts about my alcoholism, and he done it in 10 minutes. It talks on in step 5 here, 4 or 5 or somewhere later on. I can't actually remember where it is, where, an alcoholic, properly armed with the facts about himself, can win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in, a matter of hours. He done it to me in 10 minutes. Because I was ripe. I was ready to move on. Turning back didn't look like an option. Although I was afraid of it happening, it didn't look like an option to me. And I was ripe fruit, ready to be picked off the tree, and he could see it. And the book's been kind of nice to us up to this point. You ever watch a guy that you're working with, and you bring him to your house, and you sit down, and you go through the prefaces and the forewords, and tell him, share about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you do the doctor's opinion, and it's all lovey-dovey, and he's got his book, and he's taking notes, and he's getting some information about himself. And it's a beautiful experience, and we do the same with We Agnostics, and he's sitting there nodding his head, smiling, and he's lying to you. He's not buying it because I didn't buy it, but now we're getting to the part here where the book's going to hit me right over the head with what my real problem is. All right, I got an allergic reaction to the alcohol, and, I got a crazy obsession that keeps bringing me back to the drink. But that's not really what my problem is. What keeps driving me back to the drink? And then the book on page 62 hits me right over the head with the truth. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion. I think that's probably one of the most scariest words in the whole book, self-delusion. I'm lying to myself and I don't even know it. I don't even know it. Self-seeking, that's my favorite game right there. Someone asked me, I was having a conversation where one of my old-time mentors in AA there recently, and I'd had a bit of an argument through email, Facebook, That's my new form of arguing, is on Facebook, And I had this argument with someone who I knew pretty well from my past. And, she was mean to me. She's hitting me with all kinds of stuff over the head and talking about my personal life and stuff. And I was talking to my buddy about it later on that night. And I said something to him, how dare she? How kind I've been to her in my life? And he goes, wow, the dark side of generosity, Adrian. Oh, I don't like that. The dark side of generosity. And what that is that's what I've been doing my whole life. You know, I've been taking care of you, making sure, you know, you get your needs and everything you want, but really underneath it, you know, I'm getting ready to push you off the cliff to get what I want. And I met this gentleman, you know, and then it goes on to talk about self-pity. You know, when that doesn't work out, then I feel sorry for myself, and I try to get you to feel sorry for me with me. You know, and I hope you don't have a sponsor like that. You know, that agrees with everything that you say, and oh, yes, yes, yes. My sponsor generally doesn't agree with me. If we're talking about serious AA spiritual stuff, he agrees with me in different life things and stuff, and that's a good thing. You know, he generally doesn't. And that started for me. I met this gentleman called Kevin. And, you know, I stood in front of him, and I asked him a question that, oh my God, I don't know why I ever asked him it. But I'm in so much pain, I'm in so much fear. I'm driven by the 100 forms of fear that they're talking about here. And I'm standing in Alcoholics Anonymous, probably less than a week away from a drink. I'm not doing well. My mind is attacking me. There's a darkness on me. I don't know if I'm coming or going. And I turned around to him and I said to him, you know, he goes, are you okay? And I said, I don't think so. I said, could you... He says, well, when's the last time you had it? I said, can you tell me what my problem is? And it's almost like he went to get a cup of coffee and a packet of cookies to come back to answer the question, you know? And he says, well, when's the last time you had a drink? And I said, well, it was less than a week ago. And he says, well, I mean, drinking's not your problem? And what I heard was, you don't belong here either. You know, I thought he was going to tell me to leave. And what happened was the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me in my whole life. He turned around and he says, you know, kid, you want to know what your problem really is? And I said, yeah, sure, let me have it. He goes, you're a self-centered prick. I'm telling you, I wanted to punch him right in the face. And I didn't. What I started to do is I started to sob in front of him. And I said to him, you know, not me. I'm one of the kindest fellas you'll ever meet in your whole life. And he says, oh yeah, absolutely. He says, you'd give me the coat of your back, big guy, wouldn't you? And I said, sure. He says, yeah, as long as there's something underneath the table for you in it, right? And I'm like, oh, I get this guy. You know, he's popping me left, right, and center. And what he done was he nut-cracked my ego. And he says, man, you know, this guy was awake. He was awake to the 12-step and looking for newcomers. I don't think anybody else in that meeting really was. But he was, and he had a conversation with me later on, and he turned around and he said, you know, man, God put you in front of me. There you're standing with a black eye, beard, baseball cap on with a sign across it saying, anybody comes near me and I will kill you. And what it's really saying is, you know, I'm afraid, will you please help me? I had a big coat on up over my head. It was snowing outside. It was February of 1935. And he said, you know, man, he said, I looked at you and I said, oh boy, look what we got on our hands here. He seen what he had on his hands. And he prayed to God. He said, God, help me with this one. Put the words in my mouth. And he said, I couldn't believe what was coming out of my own mouth. I really thought you were going to punch me. And, you know, and I asked him a question. I says, you know, he said, listen, kid. He said, every time you put alcohol in your body, you know, do you find it impossible to stop at any time? Or do you... I said, do it every time. Every time. He said, do you ever make plans for yourself when you're waking up in the morning that you're not going to drink and you end up drinking? I said, dude, every day it's became every day. He said, do you ever spend a bit of time away from alcohol and life just becomes so unbearable that you just can't make it through the day? I said, yeah. He says, that's untreated alcoholism. That's untreated alcoholism. And what he done for me that day was he opened the gates of hell and he said, come on, Ed. Come on. Come on in the Alcoholics Anonymous here with us. And the tears are trickling down my cheeks. No one had ever spoken to me that way before, and we hadn't ended up wrestling around the floor. You know? No one had ever hit me straight between the eyes like that. And I said, well, what do I have to do about it? He says, I don't know. But I can show you what I've done. He said, do you have a big book? I said, I do. He says, I want you to go home and I want you to read the first part of it. And if you decide that you want to go on with this, he says, I want you to read it all the way up to page 58. Sorry, page 63, right here to the third step. And if you want to go ahead with this, I want you to give me a call. I went home that night, guys. And I got home from the meeting late. I mean, the meetings go from 8:30 to 10 p.m. In Belfast, in Ireland, it lasts for an hour and a half. And I got home that night, and I started reading it right away, and I had it read that night. And I called him the next morning, and he said, okay, I'll be there in an hour. And I'm like, oh, hold on a minute here. You know, I mean, I told you I was willing, but this is ridiculous, you know. And he says, have the big book with you. So, next thing I see this guy showing up in a suit, business type guy, which I was impressed with. I'm like, wow, this guy's really into this. You know, and he brought me to his house, and what we started to do that day was we started to take the first 3 steps. Now, I gotta tell you guys, I think my first couple of times through the steps, I don't remember too much about it, and I don't think too much actually happened. You know, Bob was talking about the old timers, talking about that silent voice of the inner God. I did not have the inner God in my first 5 years of sobriety. The chatter in my mind was so loud. And I'm not saying that you can't have that. I see guys that do have that. I just wasn't evolved spiritually enough. I mean, I had an abnormal drinking condition that I carried into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got all these things going on, the self-delusion, the different fears, the self-seeking, the self-pity. I have a catalogue of events in my life that I'd rather forget. You know, I've damaged probably every relationship that I've ever been in. That's for family members. I mean, even my dog, you know, I mean, it used to frown when I'd walk past. I mean, the cat just fell over me, you know. I mean, I just didn't know how to be in relationships and stuff. And this guy, Kevin, came and he picked me up and we went to his house and we sat down and we had a talk about the first 2 steps. And he turned around and he said to me, he said, are you done? Are you done for good? And that was a pretty intimidating question because that sounds like something that's way out of my reach. You know, being done for good, being done drinking for good. For heaven's sake, I'm just off the streets of Belfast, hustling, shaking and moving. You know, drinking has been the most important part of my life for the last 14, 15 years. It's been the center pillar of my life, drinking. Nothing happens in Adrian's life without drinking. That's what it's become. You know, nothing. I can't do anything without drinking, you know. And he's asking me, am I done for good? And he goes through a lot of the stuff here in the second step that Bob talked about. God is either everything or he's nothing. I love the way Bill Wilson throws that in there. I mean, God is either everything or he's nothing. What's your choice to be? I mean, are you kidding me? Look where I just came from. And you're asking me that God is everything? And, you know, I was willing to believe that at the beginning. I was totally willing to believe that. Kind of willing to believe because Kevin seemed so lit up and on fire about Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what was luring me in. That's what was attracting me. Kevin's passion for AA. He invited me into his house. His kids were climbing over the top of me. You know, I would call him up on the phone, and I didn't have a cell phone when I came to AA. I mean, I didn't have much, guys. A couple of cracked teeth, a nice black guy, living in my mom's house, no driver's license, no bank account, no watch in my arm. The old timers used to say, if you haven't lost your front teeth in your watch, you haven't hit your bottom yet. You know? If you still have your watch and you haven't lost your front teeth, please don't be leaving. It's okay, you know. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that the old timers used to say in the group that I got sober in. And, you know, this guy was so, he'd made AA such a way of life, which scared me also. It was attractive, but it scared me. I had no cell phone, and he told me, if you need to call me, you have to ask your mom, can you use her phone? And you don't call my cell phone. Because he's the guy that brought telecommunications to the north of Ireland. I think he could have given me a cell phone to call him, right? You know? And, you know, he says, you call my house phone. And he wouldn't be in at times, and his wife wasn't a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. She'd keep me on the phone till he get in. You know? Unbelievable, man, really. Those are the things that really brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous and kept me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I went to Kevin's house that day and we sat down, and he said, are you done for good? And I was like, I want to be. He says, why did you come to Alcoholics Anonymous for? Thanks, Charlie. Why did you come to Alcoholics Anonymous for? And I said, man, you know what? I just don't ever want to feel the way that I'm feeling ever again. I really don't. And he says, well, that sounds like the right answers to me, Adrian. He says, so if that's the case, better get on our knees here. In his house in Belfast with the curtains open. You know? That made me feel horribly uncomfortable. It really did. He says, traditionally, this is what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we get on our knees. And he said, is there any, you know, at that moment, guys, when I got on my knees with Kevin to take the third step prayer, I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. I really didn't. I mean, who did when they took their first third step? Who knew what they were doing? You know, I tell you, 16 years into this deal, and I've been a student of this book for all that time, I don't think you can ever fully take the third step 100%. I mean, who has really let go so much that they believe in God in every moment of every day? I certainly haven't. And I mean, if you have, I would love to hear your experiences with that, but I haven't. I certainly haven't. You know, it talks about agnostic back in the second step, lack of experiential knowledge with God. I mean, that's what I was. I was an agnostic when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was very agnostic when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm so agnostic that every time Kevin mentions the word God, I cringe on the other end of the phone. I can't do the God word at all. I've had a bit of a sickener with God. I mean, I grew up in Belfast. On one side of a peace wall that's 30 feet high in some areas. You know, on the Catholic side of Belfast, there's Protestants on the other side of it, and we're killing each other over God. So I got a lot of these prejudgments and stuff that they're, you know, these prejudices that they're talking about in the second step, and I've had a sickener with God, and it's really my idea of God, where the sickener's from. And I'm not too comfortable with the God word. I'll tell you, the thing that got me comfortable with the God word was pain. Psychological pain. Because every time I would talk to Kevin, he would resort me to do something simple in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then he'd say, well, why don't you go to God? And I left his house that day, writing an inventory, writing my first inventory. Now, you know, I'm not going to get into the fourth step and stuff right now, but, you know, there's a 4-column inventory in this book. And, you know, I tell you, from my experience of doing step work with people and watching people that do step work with other people in my circle and other circles, I've learned there's no experts in the big book. There are none. I mean, if you're an expert in the big book, you're kind of an expert in spiritual experience and God. No, I don't think we have those, or we should have those in Alcoholics Anonymous. I really don't. What I see a lot is, if you're sincere about the work that's being done in here, and the person that you're working with is sincere about doing the work in here, I think we're safe and protected. Now, as long as it's not ridiculous. You know, I mean, and I do see some ridiculous stuff going on. I think as long as we're trying to keep with this book as best we can. And, you know, something else I might want to say on a side note here is, you know, just because we're doing what it says in this book and stuff, there's a lot more to it than that. Before I sit down to do this with a guy, I do what Kevin done with me. I get them to have a home group. I mean, if you don't have a home group, you're not a member of AA, as far as I'm concerned. You know, and that's just my opinion. You know, it's not the gospel, but, you know, if you work with me, you're going to have a home group before we start doing this book. You're going to have a job in your home group, at least one. You know, I've watched over the years, and, you know, I think I've kind of suffered from it myself a little bit at times, even though I've always been an active part of a group. I've always had a service position and stuff. I think sometimes we can get so enwrapped in this book that we can kind of start doing this from our own house. Sponsoring people over the phone. Getting them just to come over to our house. And I qualify that as a meeting when someone comes to my house to sit down and do this work. But it doesn't mean to say that I don't need to go most nights to Alcoholics Anonymous and show up in there where I'm doing nothing but taking actions. That means not talking. Most of my meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm at the back doing something. I have 2 service positions in my home group right now. One's at the audio table, and I get to hear who all the hot speakers are. Who's selling the best speakers? You know, who's the best speakers at the group? Because I have the whole catalog all the way back. And I spoke there last year, so I had a little look, you know, to see how many people bought my CD. Which I'm admitting it, you know. I mean, but something funny happened. The guy came over to me from the audio, who's recording the meeting, and he handed me a big pile of speakers. He says, you need to replenish that and put them back on the table. It's this guy, Bob D. He's selling CDs like hotcakes. And he didn't make the connection. He didn't know that Bob was my sponsor, you know. People are coming to me and asking me, who's a good big book speaker? Who's this? And I've been kind of promoting Bob a bit, which I shouldn't really do, but, you know, I've been doing that. So I have, Not that he needs me to promote him, but you know. So I have a couple of jobs, and I have a couple of jobs in my home group and stuff. So it's important for me to take the actions, you know, of all Alcoholics Anonymous, and not just journey kind of through this book the way, you know, just kind of like be a big book ninja, you know. I said it, guys, what my sponsor said to me when they asked me to help them. Okay, I sponsor in all three legacies. The unity, the service, and the recovery part of it. Because just in this by yourself, you can get a little goofy. You know? Just in this by yourself, you can kind of get a little goofy where someone else is just in this by themselves. You know, I start to do weird things and think that there's certain meetings that I can't go to and certain speakers that I shouldn't bring and stuff. So it's important for me to do the whole thing here, and that's where I started off with Kevin. So it says being convinced for step 3, and I took it not knowing what I'd done. And I started to write an inventory, which was in story form. It was like a story I had to tell. And, it got me up and running. And something happened when I took that third step. I mean, I didn't know what I was surrendering to. I mean, the first 3 steps doesn't even mention the word surrender here, but the essence of it is surrender, right? So I didn't even know what I was surrendering to, but, you know, I'd knelt down with my sponsor, and I'd started to do this thing, and I just got up to my neck, guys, in Alcoholics Anonymous taking action. I was there every night. I was there twice a day. You know, I'm collecting the basket money. My first job in AA was the ice tray cleaner. After 6 months, I graduated the secretary of the group. I started bringing speakers in, and all the while, I started going through this for Kevin. Looking back, guys, I don't actually think we take the third step. I don't think we do. Hardly I know I've started to take the third step. I'm walking away with a pen in my hand, and I got a notebook and page in front of me, and I'm starting to write inventory. What's more evidence that I've started to take a third step is that I'm sitting down and I'm sharing my inventory with my sponsor, and I'm moving through that process. And I'm out and I'm starting to wrap doors. Hardly I know that I've really started to take the third step. I've come through the other side of this process, and I've started to work with others. I mean, those are all the hallmarks of the third step right there, a good third step. So I didn't really know too much about this. I didn't know about the selfishness and stuff. And it goes on to say that after being convinced we were at step 3, being convinced of what? That we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. I mean, that's the first part right there. I got that part, yeah. After my conversation with Kevin, I was absolutely sure, 100%, that probably no human power could have relieved my alcoholism. Absolutely, got that 100%. That was really important to me, and here's how it was important. My last drunk was by no means my worst one. The last period of my drinking was by no means the darkest, worst period of my life. I mean, I hadn't been to a psych ward in a while. You know, I mean, I was still getting into fights and I couldn't hold a job. But I mean, it wasn't the worst period of my life. But here's the deal. Here's the difference. And here's where I started to concede inside myself that I was ready to do this, guys. My bottom looked like this. For the first time in my life, I knew that no doctor, I'd been to plenty of them, any form of medication, any rest in a hospital, any relationship, any girl, living in any part of the world, I'd already done 3 big geographicals, London twice, New York once, all ended in disaster. Any kind of money, any amount of money, any kind of job, I knew that I was beat. I knew that I had something for the first time in my life that nothing could fix. That nothing could fix. And all of a sudden, guys, this little murmur, this little mustard seed of hope, I think that it may be able to be fixed in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I'm seeing a guy who's been through the same struggles as me, and he's been many years sober. And it's starting to work. And that never happened when people were trying to 12-step me 2 years, 3 years before that. And then the third pertinent idea here is that God couldn't wait if he were sought. And there's part of me for the first time in my life that's willing to do that. I mean, I've surrendered to the booze many, many times. Many times. Every hangover morning I surrender to the booze. But this is the first time I've ever been asked to surrender to the booze and a higher power. I mean, surrender to a higher power? I never thought of that once when I was drinking. How simplistic and how profound is that? Surrender to a higher power. Isn't all the most simple stuff the most profound stuff, isn't it? This started to make sense to me. It really did. And I started to get a grip on this, and I started to be convinced of what was going on here, and I started to write that inventory that Kevin gave me. See, when I took that third step, guys, that was a game changer for me. I didn't see it at the time. I couldn't see it at the time. Most of the great things that have happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous in my life, I haven't really been present in the moment with it, what was happening. It wasn't until I went on down the line. It was like Bob talked earlier about the guy lighting the lights in London. You know, you look back and you see the work that God's done, you see the creation and stuff. And I never seen that happen. But it was a game changer for me. Everything started to change when I took that third step. Everything started to change when I made that effort and get down on my knees, even though I wasn't really chuffed about doing it. I really wasn't. And what started to happen is things started to fall into place. It was very dark and foggy. You know, I mean, I struggled. Oh my God, 6 months sober. I mean, I'm the secretary of the group and I'm sitting on my hands, rocking from side to side. I mean, I can't sit in my own skin. Nothing's really changed or shifted or moved yet. You know, but I'm a part of Alcoholics Anonymous, and, you know, Kevin's not an expert with his big book. But you know what? See, looking back, you know what attracted me to him? He loved me. He cared about me. He took me under his wing. He brought me into his house. I hadn't felt that from anybody in a long, long time that seemed to have a real answer for me. He used to go wash his car at the car wash, and I would just want to come along with him to wash his car with him. You know, I'd call him up in my head, it'd be on back to front, and I'd be in fear, and I'd be in pain, and, you know, I'd just been in a collision course like this guy on page 61 here, you know, the actor and the director. I'm banging into everybody. You know, I'm getting involved in bouts of road rage in my mother's sports car. I haven't had a driver's license in my life, you know. I mean, talk about dishonesty, but I'm telling myself in my head, well, I need the car to go to AA to get well, you know. I mean, I don't have a driver's license, insurance, or anything, and I'm calling him up, and I'm absolutely insane. And he'd say, well, why don't you just come over to my house? And I'd go up and I'd have it all planned, what I was going to say to him, and, you know, we'll do this, and and I'd get to his house, and he'd open his door, and he'd bring me in, he'd go, so what's going on? Nothing. Everything's all right. I'd be okay around him. You know? And that man really guided and trusted me. And over that first year in Alcoholics Anonymous in Belfast, man, I got raised in my first year in Alcoholics Anonymous, not only by a sponsor that loved me, but by a group that loved me. And a group of drunks that were both Catholic and Protestant. I'd never seen that happen before. I mean, God's happening all around me, and I'm still blinded. The most powerful things that happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous, I think I had to be 10 years sober before I started to see it. I think I had to be 10 years sober till I started to calm down emotionally. Emotional sobriety takes time. It did for me anyway. You know, it did for me. You know, I grew up in an abnormal environment with an abnormal condition. I was back there a couple of weeks ago, and, you know, a lot of the guys that I grew up with and stuff, you know, some of them are alcoholic, but some of them are not. But one of the things that I've noticed about every one of my friends, alcoholic or not, they're mentally damaged in some way. You know, they really are. I mean, that says a lot about me and the friends I keep, you know, but, you know, they really are. And I don't know if there was extra stuff wrong with me when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know if there was. I mean, you know, I've spoke to people and I've had signs of PTSD syndrome and from what happened on the streets of Belfast and stuff. You know, I don't really read too much into all that stuff. I really don't. I know one thing, I need a God in my life. You know, I'm open to getting my help from anywhere. I've had to do that. I'm the sort of guy that's had to do that. But I'm also the sort of guy that got really lit up by spirituality. And I think, you know, in my early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, I came here in so much pain. And I started to experience so much pain. The pains of sobriety, I think it was the pain and the darkness and stuff that drove me to finding this God. Drove me to find this power. Because you guys talked about it. And I would see guys in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd come to these weekends, and I'd hear guys like Bob, and I'd hear guys like Don, and, you know, guys like the, you know, when I'd hear them speak, man, I'd almost fall off the chair, man. They seemed so lit up. They had so much power. And they weren't doing it with arrogance, or, you know, you could tell that they were really doing this. They were talking about this big book, and you knew they had experience with it. You know? And what they would do to me is, I would leave those weekends wanting to do Alcoholics Anonymous. That was my God at the beginning. wanting to do Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you leave here this weekend wanting to do Alcoholics Anonymous, then I think a message has been carried in here this weekend. You know? Wanting to go back there and go to your home group and roll up your sleeves. I was just so happy to find out that there was something wrong with me. That there was a fellowship of millions of people that had the same stuff going on. I thought it was terminally unique. I mean, Kevin started to use the language that he was using, that identification, one alcoholic to another. I thought, wow, there's a language for this. There's books written on this stuff. I mean, I'm not on my own here. And that first year in Alcoholics Anonymous was real important to me. And, you know, at 366 days sober, I ended up immigrating to America again. You know? And even through, you know, there's an important, you know, so our troubles, we think, are basically off our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Guys, you know what? You know what I've come to see? Each part of the journey, I've been that guy. It's cleared up a little bit. And you know, a wise man learns from other people's mistakes, and a fool learns from his own. I'd like to think that I'm not the fool that walked into Kevin's house that morning with a big book under his arm. I'd like to think that I've learned lessons in here. I'd like to think that I've came closer to that power, even though I feel miserably sometimes at it. And I do. And I did a lot, especially in my first 5 years. I'd done stuff in my first 5 years because I just wasn't connected to this power that I'm still cleaning up the damage from. We made decisions based on ourselves that later placed us in a position to be hurt. Let me put something else in there. We made decisions based on self that later placed us and everyone else involved in the situation to be hurt. You know? I mean, I do things on impulse. You know, get married. Why? Because she asked. Was she your type? No. Did you know that? Yes. And then I go around to my sponsor. Where's God in all this? Did God get you into it, Adrian? Well, no, but isn't he supposed to be everything? You know? And I use that everything. You know, I can use that. Well, it's God, you know? I mean, see that God is everything? Back in the second step, I think that's one of the most hidden things in our book. That I've had to really grow into that. That's got to be used with sanity. God is everything. I've came to a place in my spiritual life where I really do believe that he is everything. That makes sense to me. But it can get a little tricky. I mean, you know, you're walking past a 6-year-old and he's getting shooken by a parent and getting bounced off the wall and abused and stuff. I mean, I can't just turn around and go, oh, that's God. God is everything. I mean, I got to react to that situation with sanity. Or else people will get hurt. I mean, I just can't sit back and watch God come and, like, rescue that kid. It's like the NFL players. You know, you watch them on TV and, you know, they score a touchdown and they're jumping around and, you know, they're thanking each other and stuff and, you know, they're smacking each other on the butt. I mean, I can't just walk into the bank and, you know, some girl standing in line, smack her on the butt and go, it's God. God is everything. I mean, I'll get locked up. So there's sanity that has to come with this. And I try not to get into that whole head game of working this stuff. God is everything to me. That makes sense to me today. Do you know where I know God is everything? See, at each point in my journey, guys, I shared a little bit about it with you before. I think getting off the start with the third step, back where Kevin was, that I was willing to kind of think, okay, if I'm going to move forward on this journey, there's got to be a new center post and it can't be alcohol. I mean, that's the center. I don't think AA is conceptual. I think it's an experiential program. It's based on action. However, there are some concepts in it that, you know, move belief into faith and stuff. And I think now this is just my opinion again, yours might be different. I think the most important concept in the whole of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is it's the center post of my life that I had to get a new manager in because the job that I was doing with my life was not working. And I didn't fully accept that, but I was willing to. And again, I've had to grow into that. And, you know, it's taken time, it's taken action, it's taken hard work. And I'm still never there 100%. I took that prayer with Kevin, and I started moving on through my life. And at 5 years sober, I told you I had a roadblock again. And I'll tell you, after accumulating, I mean, I'm the guy that walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I got a couple of black eyes, I got broken teeth, I got no watch, I got all those things. I mean, I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous for basically nothing. And at 5 years sober, I'm living back in America, I'm making 6 figures a year, I've been married, I have a daughter, I've lived in a penthouse, I got the car, and here I am again, living in a little one-bedroom apartment, thinking, is there a God? Is there a God? And at 5 years, I had a real major faith crisis on my hands. It was a dark spiritual desert I went into where I didn't know there was a God in that. I really didn't. And it was time to go deeper with this. It was time to revisit this. I'm doing the other things in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm taking the actions. I'm sponsoring a bunch of guys. I've started a meeting. I'm showing up at it every week. I have a job. I'm doing all those things, but something doesn't feel right inside. No two parts of Alcoholics Anonymous will work for the 3-part problem that's going on here that I have. If I want to get connected to God and live a life that's going to have happiness, joy, and freedom like Kevin promised me back at the beginning, then I got to do it all. I got to be submerged in this whole deal. And it was time for me to go deeper. And it was time for me, because up until that point, from the inventory and stuff that I'd done with Kevin, I was like the little guy in Amsterdam, with his thumb in the dam, in the dike, because, if he takes it out, it's going to explode. I mean, that's where my life looked like from years 2 to 5 in Alcoholics Anonymous, and taking the actions. If you keep taking the actions in AA, and have a sponsor, and doing them things, no matter what's going on inside, you don't make it through it. Even if you're doing crazy sex stuff, I watch guys that do sex stuff in AA, and I'm like, that would kill me, and they make it through it. And I made it through it with all my stuff. I mean, I created this whole AA persona, and this whole false mask, just another place to hide behind. And, I done what Kevin taught me to do in 5 years. He says, see when you're getting it good, tell us you're getting it good. See when you're not getting it good, tell us you're not getting it good. And I reached out and asked for help. And for the first time, a man brought me through the whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as it's outlined in this book. And, Kevin got the monkey off my back with the inventory, the story thing and stuff, and I'm very grateful to him for that. I really am. But I started getting down to the causes and conditions. I started to see the nature of my defects. I started to see the nature of my wrongs. I started to see, really on a deeper level, that my dishonesty, my self-centeredness, my selfishness, and my fear was controlling my life from a place that I couldn't even see, from the depths of my soul. And it was my own behavior. Like it says here again, so our troubles we think are basically off our own making. I remember them telling me that when I first came to AA. And I wanted to believe you, but I didn't know how. That's why the 4th and the 5th step is so important, so I can get to see why my troubles were off my own making. And that's a promise, that's a good thing, because if my troubles were, if you're making my troubles, then I need you to change for me to change to get well. And what they're telling me here is no, I need to change to get well, and it's going to come from action. And if I take the action and have the belief, then the faith will show up. And I'll tell you guys, I went through the work again at that time that's in this book. And it took me to a different kind of power. And I've revisited that work, quite a few times over the years. And I didn't really feel myself getting introduced to this new power and stuff at the time. It took time. Going through the rest of the process, the amends process, and sponsoring guys and going through it with them and stuff. But like now, I just had surgery a few weeks ago, December 1st. And before I went into it, I'd talked to Bob about doing another set of steps, and he said it was a good idea and stuff. And I did. It was a brief set of steps, or like maybe 4 resentments or something on the inventory, and I done it and made the amends real quick. I could feel the power right away. I'm like, damn. That's pretty cool. But when my earlier experiences with the steps weren't like that, it was slow, because there's a burning off process that has to happen in here. And I don't always feel the stuff burning off. But after a period of time, when I look back over my life, this new and triumphant archway, which I'm going to walk through a free man that it talks about, new and triumphant archway. The triumphant archway that they're talking about in here, steps 4 and 5. Walking through a free man means I can't sneak anything through with me. It's all got to get out on the table if I'm going to get close to this power. So I didn't get close to the power in the second step or the third step. Things started to shift and change. It was walking on through this process and being an active member in Alcoholics Anonymous where the real changes started to happen. And I'll tell you guys, I'm gonna finish on this and move it over to Bob. I want to tell this little story. I was thinking about Bob when he said his sponsor made him shave his beard off. I had a nice perm. And he told me to shave it off.
No, I didn't. If I did, you look better the other way.
Guys, I've seen many fruits of the third step in our way of life as I walked along the journey. And what's happened for me is, you can make the steps into a really beautiful, magical experience. You can. Or you can do them kind of half-assed. Show up to your sponsors late and, you can take X amount of months to do your fourth and fifth. You can do it whatever way you want. And I'm not saying there's any specific way to do it. But what I've learned to do with this process is honor it. Just the same way as I honor my service commitments. Just the same as the way I honor my relationship with my sponsor. All of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because if I don't respect something, then it's never going to work for me. It might for a while, but eventually it won't. It'll fall off. And you can make the steps magical. A really magical process. You really can. And that's what I started to do with this. And what started to happen for me, I started to develop this really kind of relationship with this universe and this synchronicity. And I really started to see that God was in my life and that He had my back. Even with all my brokenness and my mistakes. And from the guy that walked in the AA with nothing in Belfast, not knowing who he was, where he came from, what he suffered from, anything. At 10 years sober, guys, I got to see how God was working in my life in such a way that couldn't have happened anywhere else. Only Alcoholics Anonymous were good teachers or people leading the way. And the process that we'll have here, repeatedly doing it over and over and over again, questioning myself sometimes, why am I even doing this? Why do I need to go to my home group tonight? And I'll tell you, I was in a federal court building at 10 years sober, getting my American citizenship. And I remember sitting there with a coat and tie on, because you guys taught me how to dress in here when something important's happening in my life. And to show up like I'm a recovered member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did, and I remember sitting there, and I was having a tough day that day, and I was on my own. And there was over 600 other people in that room, and the judge came out, and I already don't like him because he's a judge, I'm judging the judge, And he blew me away, because he was into what was going on. He says, you know what, I look out here, and I see all four corners of the earth being represented here today. And he says, I bet you there's some stories in this room. And the tears started just coming down my cheeks when I started to think of walking into Alcoholics Anonymous in the 81 Lisburn Road, and two guys standing waiting on me that night saying, are you new here? Welcome. I remembered them giving me the big book. I remembered my life growing up in Belfast, all the things that I've been through and made it through. Meeting Kevin, coming back to New York again. Things working out here with a whole different outlook on life. Getting the job, having my daughter. And I drove out of that court that day, and I remember driving down the big Brooklyn-Queens Expressway and looking at the Manhattan skyline and seeing the World Trade Center and a lot of the jobs and stuff that I'd worked on and thinking, wow, look what God done in my life just because I got on my knees with another alcoholic. If you haven't got on your knees yet, it doesn't say in here, get on your knees. It says the wording can be optional. It can look many different ways. But I think that's where the big change comes for alcoholics, is when we say, you know what, my way no longer works. The most pivotal moment in my journey by far, there's been many defining moments, but the most pivotal moment on my journey, the most pivotal point in my journey has been when I stopped taking my own advice. That's all I got.
I'm Bob, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Bob.
Before we start to get rid of some fourth step phobia, why don't we take a break? This looks like a good place to do it. 10 minutes and 18 seconds.